Did you love playing the X-Wing and TIE Fighter computer games from the early 90s? Do you enjoy reading descriptions of aerial and space dogfights? Have you thought that what the Star Wars books need is maybe something that combines Star Wars with Top Gun? Then does Michael A. Stackpole and Bantam Books have a series for you? The first of the X-Wing books, Rogue Squadron, came out in January of 1996, after Dark Horse Comics started an X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic in July of 1995. Rogue Squadron ultimately made it to number 12 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of January 28th, 1996, and was on the New York Times list for 2 weeks. So, of the X-Wing books, which there were 9 published by Bantam and 1 published years later by Del Rey, I reread the books by Aaron Alston a lot, but I didn't usually revisit the ones by Stackpole. So I actually had not read Rogue Squadron in a number of years. I found Corran very annoying, but I love Tycho, so I guess it evens out in the end. So a brief summary. Wedge Antilles reforms Rogue Squadron about 2.5 years after the Battle of Endor with a hand-picked group of 11 pilots. But after they're ordered to attack the secret Imperial base of Black Moon, it's looking very iffy whether Rogue Squadron will even survive these initial battles. So Rogue Squadron takes the approach of having 3 viewpoint characters, protagonists, if you will. First is Wedge Antilles, and I love Wedge. Wedge is reforming Rogue Squadron. He's really only good friends and has prior history with Tycho, his executive officer at this point, and all the other pilots here are new to him. We have people who are related to sort of original Rebellion pilots. Gavin Darklighter is Biggs' cousin, but a lot of them are new. I liked Wedge here. He's obviously in command, so he has to be in a position of authority above everyone, but he's still likable, and he sort of resists becoming close to the other pilots because he doesn't want to feel that loss that he felt when they lost, like, Biggs and Porkins and Dak and people like that. But by the end, you can tell that they're all sort of a much closer group. Our second viewpoint character is maybe even more so than Wedge, the protagonist of the story, and that is Corran Horn, who is a lieutenant. He's Rogue 9. He was formerly a Corrsec officer, and Corran is an acquired taste. I can see what Stackpole was trying to do with Corran here. Corran thinks very highly of himself. He is very skilled, but he's a loner. He's used to working alone. So most of the book is him having to learn how to work as a team. But he's such an arrogant little butt that he gets on my nerves. I don't know if this is just me rereading, if I would have felt the same the first time I read this. I also felt like Corran, not that he was judgmental of people, but that he really went off of first impressions, sort of a Lizzie Bennet problem from Pride and Prejudice, that he had one encounter with people and then was like, oh, they're like this, and you're like, Corran, gotta get to know them better. I also find it a little unbelievable that women are just throwing themselves at Corran. In the same chapter, we have both Irizi Delaret, one of the rogue pilots who's from Thyfera, proposition him, and then Mirax does it too. Mirax was just sort of doing it, I guess, hoping he wouldn't, but it seemed like Irizi definitely wanted to go there, and I was left wondering what's so great about Corran that 2 separate women in this book proposition him. I mean, at least he turned them down, but weird. Our third viewpoint character and our main antagonist at this point is Curtin Lore. He was an Imperial who worked with Corrsec on Corellia. He's got a hate boner for Corran. He's trying to track down Corran and their supervisor and Aiello Wisari, who also worked for Corrsec. So he spends most of this book trying to find Rogue Squadron, ordering people to kill Rogue Squadron, and it doesn't go well, and he's, I don't know, he'll be back. Mirax Tarek is a smuggler who works for the rebellion. She is also Corellian, like Wedge, like Corran. Apparently, her father and Corran's father had this antagonistic relationship, and it culminated in Hal Horn throwing her father essentially in jail. He got sent to the mines of Kessel for a while. From the start, Mirax and Corran are predisposed to not like each other, but it seems that they are becoming fast friends and possibly something more, especially since she propositioned him at one point. I like Mirax. She's very nice. She's very friendly. She knows Wedge. Apparently, they've known each other since they were kids. And I'll be glad to see more of her. It's great to see lady smugglers and not just your usual guys out there. Of the Rogue Squadron pilots, we don't really get to know a lot of them very well, and they're sort of like very briefly sketched. So Bror Jace is the other pilot from Thyfera, and he wants to be the best. He and Corran have this competition of who can shoot down the most imps. Bror won, but in the end of the book, he's called away to go back to his family on Thyfera, so we might not see him for a while. We've got Nawara Ven, the Twi'lek lawyer. Really, though, what we consistently get over and over again is Stackpole talking about his brain tails, and I find male Twi'leks really weird looking, especially compared to female Twi'leks who look perfectly fine to me, so I don't know. Apparently that's the most interesting thing about Nawara Ven. He's got brain tails and he's always using them. And then we have, obviously, Gavin Darklighter, a young teen. He's only 16 from Tatooine. So we get, you know, usual comments of people from Tatooine being like, oh, canyons, no problem. Yeah, we know you guys. You grew up flying through Beggar's Canyon. You're great at canyons. We've got Rysati Anir, who's from Bespin, and she's blonde, and I guess she's got a thing going with Nawara. We've got Corran's wingmate, Urul Krieg. He's a Gand. He lost an arm at one point, and he speaks of himself in the third person, so that's Urul for you. And then we've got some other pilots that he doesn't deal with in much depth, mostly because they're doomed. They're gonna die. If they're gonna die, Stackpole doesn't put a lot of effort into building their characters and making you feel sympathetic for them, so that when their death comes, you're just like, oh, them. Lujane Forge grew up on Kessel. She confronts Corran about being standoffish, and she just seems nice. So, of course, when the Imperials send some commandos to take out the rogues, she's the inspirational martyr that brings them closer together. And then on their first attack on Black Moon, when Earl loses part of his arm, we also say goodbye to the Bothan pilot. I don't remember his name, and I don't think he had any lines either. We also say goodbye to Andorni Hui, who's a Rhodian. She at least had a few lines. She was Lujane's wingmate, but she's gone. And I guess to round out the rogues, I have to mention M-Tray, who's their protocol unit, but he has a few quirks. Number one is apparently you can activate a scrounging mode where he's just scrounging things and buying things on the black market. And that almost ends up giving away the location of their secret mission. But Tycho and Mirax are able to foil that. He also, if you say shut up 3 times in a row, will just turn into basically like a terminal, which I think will also come into play later on, but right now we don't know what that's for. And last, my favorite, the one I loved, Tycho Chelchu. He's an Alderaanian who was an Imperial, but after the destruction of Alderaan, defected to the rebellion. Stackpole has placed him as one of the A-Wing pilots during the Battle of Endor, so he was there at Endor and presumably at other things, and he was captured by Imperials and escaped. So, sort of using the inspiration of what happened to British pilots during World War II that if they were captured by the Germans and then escaped, they were no longer able to fly again. So after his escape from Imperials, the New Republic leadership basically doesn't trust Tycho, and he's not allowed to fly a ship like everyone else. He's the executive officer. He's stuck on a shuttle with no weapons, and he's basically followed around by guards at all times. It's awful. They assume he's a spy, aren't willing to trust him. But Tycho is such a good guy that he still wants to help Wedge and be a part of what he's doing, even though it comes at such a great cost. And then circling around to the bad guys, our overarching big bad who we met, but we will obviously see more of, and I think she is originally from the Rogue Squadron comic, is Esane Isard, or Iceheart. She's in charge of Imperial intelligence, and she's sort of the de facto leader of Coruscant right now. She has one blue eye and one red eye, and I don't think there's a reason for this other than just she was born like that, so okay, she's definitely coded as a villain. Then we had some other lesser Imperials. Some of them died. We have General Daracote, who's sort of running his own scam business on Borlius, creating Alderaanian products to sell. But he also seems to be doing something else, something nefarious that Isard brings him back to Coruscant for. There are a lot of dogfights in here, obviously. It's the X-Wing series. So they're flying X-Wings, they're shooting at Imperials, they've got little slang for them, like they call them eyeballs and squints and stuff. But sometimes reading the descriptions of the battles is a little difficult. If you've ever played any of the X-Wing video games or computer games, you can maybe sort of follow along in your head what they're doing, like shooting past, turning around, but it gets a little confusing at times. And you can sort of wonder, what is even happening here? I can't follow this. I don't know what's happening. Which, fair enough. I do like, though, the little hidden Easter egg that Stackpole gave us, which was basically the simulator that they do in the very first chapter of the book, is actually based on one of the missions from the X-Wing computer game that came out in 1993, which was amazing. It was like, hey, wait, I remember this, the frigate mission. And they're trying to do their best with it, but meanwhile, if you've ever played it, you know that you need to take out the bombers first, and then address the TIE fighter. So it was fun. It was a little bit of like an inside wink at maybe anyone who ever played those simulator games. Stackpole also perhaps overuses epithets. Epithets are something like the blue-eyed man, the Corellian, the captain, the dark-haired man, the taller man. Basically, when you don't want to use the character's name, so you just sort of describe them and use that to indicate who they are. Epithets are perhaps most well known for their abuse and overuse in fan fiction. So I was a little surprised to see Stackpole using them to this extent. In the first chapter, he doesn't give us Tycho's name, he just describes him as the blue-eyed man, which I'm fine with that. I'm fine with initial epithets. At that point in the story, Corran doesn't know who he is. Corran hasn't met him, so Corran's just going off what he sees. But then Stackpole continues to use them. It's almost like he doesn't want to use their names when that would come most natural. So we've got scenes where Wedge is referred to as the brown-eyed man, the commander, the Corellian, and I'm like, just say Wedge. I don't need these epithets. Really, if Wedge and Admiral Akbar and General Salm are having a conversation, just say Akbar, Salm, Wedge. I don't need all those descriptions, and it's really weird to find it in licensed fiction because I feel like that's something that an editor would have noted, but it feels like this is a stylistic choice on Stackpole's part, and so maybe they just let him do that. It's also a little strange how many women Stackpole describes as having long, shapely legs. And when we first get a detailed description of Erizi in Chapter 9, she is described as having very long, shapely legs, also slender and taller than Corran. Then in Chapter 12, we get a description of Esane Isard. While we don't get the shapely legs, we are told that she is tall and slender, that she's very attractive for a woman of her years, and that the white streaks in her hair make her look more exotic than middle-aged. I know that this is Curtin Lore's opinion of her, but that feels like such a bird, more exotic than middle-aged. Like, dude, shut up. And then when we meet Mirax Tarek in chapter 14, she also has shapely long legs, and she's also has a slender waist. Strangely enough, also, all three of these ladies have black hair. Two of them have long black hair in the case of Mirax and Isain Isard. And then two of them have blue eyes. Irisi is blue-eyed, and Isain is blue-eyed. Well, has one blue eye. So I guess Stackpole is a leg man and has perhaps written his ideal type into this book. After that, I was half expecting the descriptions of Lujane and Raizotti to also describe their body shape, but fortunately we just got their hair color, and I was very glad about that. And the male-female ratio in Rogue Squadron, it's better than I expected. So we have 12 pilots plus the executive officer Tycho, so that makes 13. And of those 13, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 women. 4 women and 9 men. Well, at least there were some women there. The original trilogy didn't really show any women being pilots or anything in the movies. There were some women pilots in Return of the Jedi, but they dubbed their voices over with men, so it's not really clear that they're women pilots. So 4 out of 13, more than double the men in the squadron, but it's a start. At least they're there. But most exciting, we have food. We have actual Star Wars food. Mirax makes Reichkate for Corran, and it is apparently a Corellian dessert. It has whiskey in it. It has some sort of special Corellian nuts in it. Sort of sounds like brownies in that you could break off pieces of it, but it also, I guess, has like a spicy taste. There are several recipes online for Reichkate. I'll link one in the description box. I'm very interested to try to make an actual version of it because the recipe that I found uses whiskey, rum, ginger, cinnamon, all sorts of chocolate. Sounds very, very interesting, so I will have to try that out. So, in short, I enjoyed my reread of Rogue Squadron, despite the fact that Corran Horn is just obnoxious. He's just obnoxious at times. But you know what? I can put up with Corran if there are other good characters that I get to spend time with. I will say, though, that if you find yourself bouncing off Stackpole's straightforward, military, no nuance prose, you might want to try jumping ahead to the Race Squadron books by Aaron Alston. So try Rogue Squadron, especially if you've ever played the Rogue Squadron GameCube game or any of the simulator computer games. I think you'll really enjoy it. But if you don't, just try something else. Try another one of the X-Wing sub-series. So next time, I'm going to be reading the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy by Michael P. QB McDowell, Before the Storm.